Alright, good afternoon everyone, and welcome back to our Monday's Mish-Mashing segment. We have our battle lounge here with Amara and myself, as well as Rillian possibly joining me in the actual streaming. My thought for the day has been I have a couple of things. In keeping in part with the theme of previous week, I'm going to look at my emotions or feelings when I'm playing and possibly what puts me on tilt if I end up so, or, well, what is or isn't on tilt for me. In addition to that, I'm interested to find out how some of the bad habits that I've hunted out on Kareen in previous weeks have transferred to Cammy, to try and find parallels, see if there's something else I can fix there, etc., etc. This is being rebroadcast from my Kanzuki Dynasty channel to our 2_MK team channel, with my full permission, of course. And so here we are now, with what appears to be Black Escalade and Dark Inferno facing it off. And of course, for the moment, our lounge is full, but if either of these two lovely people happens to drop out, you are certainly welcome to join us. You just have to look us up. Alright then. And looks like there's an open slot now for you if you wish to join.
So for now, it appears that our player Dark Inferno, the player Dark Inferno has left, and our Ed player is remaining.
Round one.
Alright then.
Fight.
Seeing a little lag, but overall looking mostly similar.
Just found myself thinking, with the lesson I suppose last week about being on tilt and bringing emotions to play, how Amara's usual base emotion is anger and how much Ed pisses me off personally.
But it's that bearable kind of lag, where there isn't a lot that you can see going down. It blips every now and again, but
That's
it's not
certainly
likely to rob you too much. You're probably either blocking or not blocking.
Alright then. I won't expect too much trouble then when he gets to me as well.
Ed wins. Round one. Fight.
Anyway, in terms of my own bad habits, one thing that I had been considering that I had not thought of before, as a result of the previous discussion about being on tilt and keeping your emotions in a good state while you play, is that it's very possible, although I had never thought of it or realized it in quite the same way, that I actually spend a lot more time on tilt just from my own self than I would possibly have considered or assumed to begin with. Even if only slightly, and that actually is a major contributor to my primary set of bad habits that I found some time ago. So, I will be up now, it appears, and it looks like I get to see how I face off against Ed with my Cammy, which is a bit lower level than my Karine, but shouldn't be totally disastrous necessarily. In any case, for those of you who did not watch my stream a few weeks ago, one of the main habits that I found that was causing me trouble is, well, as Just Fine put it, that I don't trust incremental movements or progress, but more so even, it is that I'm just a little too aggressive. I push where I don't necessarily actually have advantage. I'm not quite very patient. Oh dear.
Well, in Amara's case, the issue is definitely that she has a particular habit, more so a muscle memory, that makes it difficult to fight Ed because he doesn't end up getting knocked down enough.
Oh, lag. Alright then. He doesn't get knocked down enough. What does that affect precisely?
Therefore, you might have a better chance against him because your moves are more likely to knock him down.
Well, that was pure luck. With my standard execution error.
This Ed in particular isn't exactly good at dealing with being on the ground. Like, it's not that he doesn't have good wake-ups, it's that he doesn't have good neutral. So if you knock him down,
I see.
it's easier to win in neutral than it is to put yourself close to him and guess again.
Alright then.
It can be very important to focus on being able to do optimal combos, which is why some of our bots have that specific requirement. Despite some of the more common complaints about the game, it really isn't that easy for most of the characters in the game to play neutral. And that's why their pressure has to be allowed to be good. Therefore, if sometimes you leave those characters alone and you are playing a character who is themselves good at neutral, you don't have to worry so much about the state of the match. He's on his back, you get closer, but by getting closer, you allow the scramble to turn back into this, when you already had the life lead before. It is similar to the concept of opening gambits, just more specific to the player or to the character they're playing
Sure.
than to the general concept of not getting killed at the beginning of a round. Because most of that was you getting too close to him unnecessarily and then getting pummeled.
I see. Yes, I definitely often try to, well, get close and hit buttons. I am a bit more close-in or pressure-y type with my Cammy than I am with my Kareen even. Which does not necessarily serve me well.
Well, you did have some perspective that it was easier to do one versus the other. Even though it's not necessarily so.
How so?
Cammy and Kareen basically have approximately the same ability in footsies.
Hmm. Well, I guess it's our turn. Sure. Yes, I
But
noticed
if you
that...
don't play them that way,
I've noticed it's more so a little different than actually... I was going to say different, but that doesn't really help, does it? It's more so a little
the
differently
question would
shaped
be
than
what
this one.
difference you perceive there to be, because for most people there isn't any.
Alright, well that becomes...
Mailkin is not really more punishable or even particularly different than Cammy's turn knuckle, and they have approximately the same spacing.
Oh. Right. I think it may be that I simply haven't necessarily developed my footsie's patterns with Cammy as much as with Kareen.
Which is interesting because what is very often said about the two characters is that they have similar patterns. The main difference between them is that Cammy has a slightly better approach option and slightly less damage, and of course better anti-airs by most standards. It does of course help that Seppo is cancelable and does different things, but this isn't very different from doing hooligan or jumping dive kick mix-ups in most cases. At least not at the spaces where it matters.
And I perceive hooligan as noticeably more punishable, but it is partly that I overuse it, and partly that I think that I underrate the punishability of a poorly timed Orochi or Tenko.
One of the easiest things to cause you to lose in this game is underestimating your own moves.
Yes, and I've definitely had that
unwilling
problem repeatedly with several of Kareen's abilities as well. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if it's a problem I have on Cammy that I'm just not realizing, because, well, if you knew it, it wouldn't be happening, would it? Eh? Ah, I was coming out of it. Alright, good timing.
Round two. Fight.
I also managed to seemingly destroy my confirms in some of my combos with Cammy. Ah, crap. Alright. Okay. Anyway. So the question becomes, if I am underestimating something, to try and figure out in what way, or which thing even. Because, for instance, like, honestly, more times than I can count, I've ended up realizing certain buttons of Karin's are way longer than I think they are, or better for certain things.
The key question is always, what are you missing in terms of what you want to be able to do?
Indeed.
And what has a chance of filling that slot, even though you wouldn't necessarily have thought that it does indeed fill that slot?
Sure. So, I suppose that's something I'm going to need to look for, actually. I spent far too much time with Karin having that lack of glorious back medium punch that I always seem to go to the anti-air jab first. It really does not help me at all in most situations. Since she also does not have the heavy kick option.
Final round. Fight.
Well, let's see.
The key is normally to look for a deficiency in either your spacing or your timing that can be
Sure.
solved by something else.
Alright. Well, I know right about here. I'm definitely missing the Tiger Knee strike. I don't understand why my timing is so bad on landing turn knuckle and not even being able to take the medium punch follow-up off of it, given that the heavy punch even should be possible. Probably whatever it is the same thing that's keeping me from doing my crouch medium punch into things confirms as well. But other than needing to train up instant cannon strike, let's see, what do I feel like I'm missing?
It's go time.
Well,
Let's do this.
I have more or less recently, been starting to refound Crouch Medium Punch as a button, and I've been starting to put that in a bit more, although it doesn't necessarily make it into my default play, shall we call it. Well, let me just watch for what I feel like I'm missing. That has never yet been intentional, actually. Well, let's see. Things I tend to be bothered by. I always tend to... I really need to fix that muscle memory I broke with the hit confirm practice that then got into my regular combos. Which is actually a counter hit combo. Well, I always tend to use... I can see things that I may underutilize a bit as well, in that I always tend to... That hit farther than I expected. No follow-up for it, though. I tend to underuse hooligans other than the light one. And basically never use its EX form, which is, as I understand it, faster. Oops. Gotta do it right either way. But let's see. In terms of my neutral game, it can be a little hard to watch for through my simply being used to it.
This is why we go through phases in our fighting game development. We learn to autopilot, and then we learn to watch where our autopilot isn't good, but because we are already autopiloting, it doesn't take as much energy to do the autopiloting part.
Yes.
And you have time to say, I have not done this well, I have not done this well, I need to work on this. And you just pick a thing and stick with it for a while.
Oh man. It's such a weird, incorrect habit that I have there. Darn. Alright. I have a personal flaw that may be something that's more common than I think. But where... my autopilot tends to... perhaps take more of my focus than it necessarily should on some mental processing level.
It's most likely that, like most players, your autopilot only works for you well when you're winning.
That is quite very possible. How does one get an autopilot that works well when one is not winning in that regard?
By mostly the psychological effect of accepting losing and knowing why you're losing. If you can become okay with losing a particular way, then it no longer has that hold over you.
I see.
And you can just play the game.
That definitely sounds like a problem that I have. So, it also sounds like one of those problems that's much easier said than done fixing-wise. But let's see here. I suppose the way one would approach that might be figuring out what I feel when I lose. Because obviously, wanting to win is a very, very innate human desire. And our minds are wired, fundamentally on some level, for wanting to win. Ooh, very nice.
It's easier to mostly redefine winning.
Is it? That would be a good way to cheat. So let's see. I can certainly redefine winning to being able to pull off a certain thing, like a mini game that I can define for myself. That usually holds not necessarily for very long, and not necessarily for perfectly well, but usually okay for at least a set or two. And then I can go about refreshing it, of course. So... Well, in this case, what would I pick? Is there another general way that one can do that other than just applying minigames? It's the first option that comes to mind, and certainly the easiest, being the only that comes to mind for me personally. But do you have any others that I may not necessarily be thinking of?
Round one. Fight.
There's usually some base strategy for your character that you're missing. Flatly missing.
Okay.
Executing that base strategy can always end up feeling like a victory because you're either emulating someone you've seen use it, or just feel comfortable with it.
Yes.
It's relatively easy to use the ones that say, well, hey, you should use your meter for this or use your meter for that. Most likely neutral. So in your case, you could, for example, focus on learning when to use your meter for EX.
That would work, I suppose. Darn. I just tried to there and it didn't work out for me with inputs. But that's definitely not the same thing as failing the technique. Ouch.
This forces you to focus on looking for opportunities to use it, and then when you find one, you get a positive feedback from thinking of it.
Indeed. And hello, Mr. Joker.
Greetings, Mr. Joker. Responses tend to come through the actual stream.
Indeed. Don't have time to be typing while I'm trying to win or trying to EX Hooligan, as the case may be.
For example, you might learn something about hooligan while doing it in situations that just otherwise wouldn't seem like a good idea. You just think to yourself, should I do this here? What would happen if I did this here? Would it be a terrible idea? And you might surprise yourself by realizing this isn't a terrible idea.
Indeed.
That, however, was a terrible
That was a
idea.
terrible idea. But it was actually prompted more so by the thought that in the last few I tried, I definitely ended up, well, mistiming the dive kick because I'm used to normal Hugin dive kicks, which give me much more time. And so I was thinking about getting the timing right on it and didn't necessarily think about getting the, well, I suppose timing right on it in terms of when we would do it versus just...
One of the problems with Street Fighter V is that it is actually too understandable.
Uh-huh.
Because the game is so accessible, and because certain routes are effective at lower levels, rather than basically just mashing buttons. Players who are not familiar with the Street Fighter franchise feel as if they're being told not to be creative. When Street Fighter has never really been a game of creativity in terms of things like combos. You've seen Super Turbo tournaments, you know there's no creativity in terms of combos there. But the game is considered to have a lot of depth because of the creativity in approaches to situations. Most of these, however, are only learned by people who are crazy or silly enough to try particular strange things. For example, we don't know whether or not there is any invincibility on Hooligan, and we don't know when Hooligan's hitbox gets out of the way of a Hadouken. You might be able to EX Hooligan over Hadoukens, but have never tried because you just figured, oh, that won't work. And you're so focused on doing what you're doing now, which is basically jump in, hit 2 pressure buttons, go back to neutral, that you never feel as if there is any more to explore in the game.
I see. That's a very dangerous trap to get caught in. It seems like it could very greatly limit someone's growth for a very long time.
Well, that is part of the reason why Tokido and Sako are basically the only strong Akuma players that most people know. Why? Because they're extremely creative people. And it isn't specifically that only Akuma has those tools, because if you've seen Sako try to play other characters, he does more or less the same things. He looks for stuff that isn't really obvious to do, and just does it mostly in training mode where he won't lose terribly.
Sure, because I mean, you still need to keep up the psychological aspect of life.
But a large part of why Tokido beat Punk, for example, was it Punk or was it Valor? Oh no, Kazunoko. That whole... What I was trying to point out at the time was the Sako special, or I think it came from Sako. I know that he was definitely the only person I saw practicing it. He has the ability and tendency to bait the V reversal from Kami, then parry it for a full combo. But most people don't think to themselves, oh, I've trapped Kami in the corner, I should be ready for her V reversal with my parry that I nearly never use.
Indeed.
This is probably a Sako Tokido thing.
It's kind of in the line of insane tactics no one would have thought worked until they did, and it did glorious things for them.
And it's very easy to get caught up in the idea that Street Fighter has no creativity, it has no things that you can do, because people want creativity in combo routes, they say. They also say things like, oh, this game doesn't let me express myself. I think parrying Kami's V-reversal into large damage counts as expressing yourself.
Yes, yes, I think it does.
But then someone would argue, well, it's not hard, anyone could do that. But I've seen Sako literally practice this thing for 3 hours. So maybe the fact that it quote-unquote only takes 3 hours to do this makes people think it will be simple to deal with, but then there's so many more of them.
Indeed. Yeah, and I mean, you learn one good trick that, well, plenty of camis have possibly never gone up against this if it's not all that common. And then you learn another good trick, and I mean, if you can spend 3 hours every week or every 3 or 4 days putting in some new tech, well, by the time next Evo runs around, you're going to have quite a few of those.
Mm-hmm. But because when people see most tech, especially in our high-paced world of internet and many, many streams, they have a lot more availability of things. They've seen more combos and stuff before.
Indeed.
And situational uses for moves are much more easily known to people. Also, people don't like having hype about the fact that it's just a general thing. If someone says, wow, that was so sick, I've never seen that before, and someone goes, oh, you're so late, everyone knows that. The reaction you get is a generally less hype community overall. Until stuff happens in top 8 and then people feel more justified in being hype about it, even though it probably is well known to top players. But sometimes, due to unconventional characters, someone will in fact know something really cool. For example, Big Bird was known to be hype for punishing Birdie's sweep, which is for nearly everyone else close to impossible. Or the move that does it is really obvious. So everyone thinks, okay, at max range, Birdie's sweep is beaten by beast characters and no one else. But he punishes it with Ken's EX Tatsu. And this is really hard to do, but because it's really hard to do, him managing to do so consistently makes people think, oh, that's so hype, that's so cool, I've never seen that before.
Sure.
But, of course, this usually requires that you spend some large-ish amount of time just figuring out what you can do with certain amounts of meters, certain amounts of situations, but it's so easy to not do that.
Sure.
You can't be sure that there is creativity if all you're doing is watching people repeat certain things to try to get others into the situation where they can. Itazan can apparently EX grab people out of Rashid trying to dash through the whirlwind on reaction.
Yeah.
I don't think most people are going to go, I can do that in my sleep, that's so easy.
I don't think anyone sane is going to say, I can do that in my sleep. Unless they've
But
spent
the question is,
quite a lot of weight.
what do you have that does that? Cammy's a relatively straightforward character, but she's not that straightforward. She does have some probably hidden interesting things in here. But if you're just going to do what you just did for basically the entire round, of course it's easy to come to the conclusion that this is pretty much simplistic fighter.
Right.
But on the other hand, if Amara starts to parry you, you're going to have to find something else.
Yes. For that moment, I
Because
was actually...
she can parry that every time.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple timing-wise. And parry doesn't care about direction, even if I do manage to slip right over her head.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about your crouch medium punch into crouch medium kick. That is parryable. Always.
I see.
Similarly, Daigo's parry of Cammy's V trigger cannon strike is not that difficult
No.
if you know exactly when your opponent is going to do it. The difficult part is realizing that you know how to make your opponent do it.
Indeed. Huh.
Counter hit, push back, dash stuff.
I would never have guessed that at any range where I wanted to do crouch heavy punch, it moves me forward enough that I can do crouch medium punch after. Well, I mean, if it hits anyway, at least.
And therefore now you know one more thing.
Indeed. That I would never have guessed if I had not just accidentally managed to pull it off. Yay, fight money! In any case, on the way, if any of you on stream or watching the stream are interested in joining, feel free to search us out, or you can drop us your CFN in the stream chat here, and we can invite you to our lounge.
Round one. Fight.
I really have to stop. The other useful thing is this will beat a Tatsu. So if I'm at a certain spacing where Tatsu is like the only way in on me, if I hit that, it will either probably block or stop said Tatsu.
Mm-hmm.
Not even what I intended to put in. I really need to take the jab out of that string, though.
The other thing that is easily noticed is that we are still at the stage of the game where people believe there's an optimal way to do certain things.
Like what things?
Round two.
Just an optimal way to play a character, for example.
I see. I can't say
For
necessarily.
example, the argument that Ryu does not have enough good ways to get in. And that you need to be able to get in this game. Now, I'm not one to say that is definitely true or not true. But it's definitely true that a lot of people believe that the way in this game is to get in. They cite the concept of explosive damage without really having to take into account that most characters don't actually have that. It's just that the characters that frustrate them have that.
Sure. What's the other way is this?
You win.
So as for what you can gain, basically your crouching medium punch can be cancelled into hooligan.
I had
And
never
at
even
that
thought
point,
of
the
that.
question becomes,
Does that do anything?
can your opponent actually respond to it?
I have no idea
Do
how that would
certain
even play out.
characters respond to that better than others, etc.
Huh. Indeed. I have no idea how that would even play out, so I'm actually curious to check it then. So in that case... Well, I'm going to find out now. Because I'm almost not sure what it would be, can they respond to at all. Because I'm not even sure what it would do at that close of range. Obviously, doing a raw at that range is suicidal, but... Of course, the trick being I need to actually get in and pull it off.
The problem is that now, because you are ended up focused on that, the rest of the game feels more as if it's supposed to be around that. And it leads to failures of various kinds and makes people think that this is not worth it when really they just never had the time to think about it. And certainly it's not for fighting every character.
Yes.
But
well,
I'm
very
betting
few
it's
are.
fairly effective against Balrog.
Well, it forces charge to drop. So... I wonder what happens if I do it on... Oops.
It also lets you do things like that if you use EX, because EX will not go over.
Indeed. Nor will heavy, actually, no matter what you do. So I can do that even without the meter. Although, obviously, it won't be quite as quick, or hit quite as hard. In fact, if I choose to use medium, it's effectively a negative edge thing for me already. So it's very easy to input. Oops, did not even intend the activation there. That's...
But it is at least a variation outside of the standard crouching heavy kick mix-up that has the potential to make someone refocus long enough that you might actually get the crouching medium kick without having to think too hard about it.
So, yes.
Alternately, maybe there's a specific spacing at which if someone blocks turn knuckle and you immediately hit crouching medium punch and do it, maybe there's some space where that's particularly safe or dangerous.
Indeed. But yes, I don't know necessarily what you're asking, Joker, but the thought we're currently focused on is canceling Crouch Medium Punch into Hooligan just to see what happens. And I think light is not the correct answer for it.
It depends, because light will actually cause you to go over to a point, but then you will end up dive kicking back.
Ah, yes, so I just need to delay that dive kick, actually, and it's a matter of not quite having the execution yet. Whereas I know heavy limits my options to some degree in that it's... You know, I bet... Well, no. Sadly, Crouch Medium Punch only V cancels, which makes sense for its range, but... Damn it! Damn it! Fine. I can't mash that. That was... dumb. I saw... Oh, hey, look! Shit! Doesn't help if I put out DPs instead of CAs. Well then. Though actually, you can probably EXDP my CA on reaction. Because, I think it says 5
I believe that
start.
medium punch DP will beat your CA on reaction.
Yeah. See, what I feel like is that it would involve too much. If I can get myself to hit the kick after that, dear lord. So if I do hit the kick in a reasonable time to be just after the cross-up, that could be somewhat useful. So that might be something that I could consider grinding. Let's see if I can do it with, or rather, what I get when I do it with the mediums or heavies. Interesting, I think that medium actually did not... No, I think that was a heavy. That animation was okay.
Round 2. Fight.
It is stronger versus particularly defensive opponents, for sure.
Yes, because they'll be more interested in blocking, and well, Cammy doesn't have a cross-up, so it can be quite good, and I think if I had time to throw with, shit. Because it'll go airborne, too. So if it's on a block, and then if I can convince them that maybe, I can possibly also cancel lights, If I convince them that I try and tick throw, or might after a certain point, it gives me the ability, if I can enter it, it would give me the ability to turn that into something that they then expect. Either they're going to try and block me, or they're going to try and throw me. Either way, they're probably not going to try and assume Cammy will use her overhead. So the first question becomes, does it cancel on block? Which I expect it would. Not fast enough.
There's also a range where you can force the slide part of the hooligan, the razor edge slicer, to actually be almost plus. I believe it is almost plus.
Interesting. That would involve hitting on a late active frame. So...
It's just a distance trick, I believe.
So depending on which button I use, if it's across, just being very close to you. Otherwise, I'm not sure it's possible with the heavy. I think it would probably need to be a cross-up launched from nearish.
No, it's definitely possible.
With the heavy version
Razor Edge
specifically?
Slicer has 9 active frames and is only -2. If you can get her to start the slide rather far out, and your opponent actually hit, you will be very plus. The problem with that is that being very plus doesn't help if you're also very far away.
Yes. Well, the trick is that that is a no-input follow-up, so I don't necessarily get to control where it goes off, which is why I was going to exclude the heavy, at least by initial impression, although I will test this, rather than, but not necessarily the medium and the light, simply because I won't be able to make it go from far out, I don't think. So maybe if Amara will let me...
No, because you cancel it, that actually happens, and that's precisely the sort of thing I'm talking about.
Wait.
If you cancel a hooligan, the space that it uses becomes different. If your opponent is crouching versus a hooligan, the space that it moves changes. You can force your opponent to crouch versus hooligan by doing that setup where they're expecting the medium kick and therefore must be crouching.
I can use my other hand for that because I have medium kicks in my throw input and my V-skill input, which somehow makes that execution easier. That was silly.
But there's more pieces to the puzzle than that, and that's why it's exactly what I was saying before. It is easy to come to the conclusion that there's no creativity if you don't actually interact with the layers. It is easy to make hooligan reposition if you are blocking normally and walking backward. But what if for some reason you could get the person to think to walk forward? And yet again, you have this option because hooligan lets you do the dive kick, which means that they needed to be blocking, which means that they should, since you can force the dive kick to cross up, they should have been pressing in the other direction. And then if you don't enter any input and end up sliding away from them, they have now walked in the direction you want to, etc., etc.
Wait, say that bit again.
It's easier to show than to actually...
Okay.
So you're probably going to have to take a break from trying to actually defeat each other and test this out. It's one of those things that's relatively easier to test with a partner than to actually do in training mode. So,
Alright, so what's the setup here?
it's really simple. All you ever have to do is crouch medium punch into hooligan.
Okay. Any preferred hooligan?
As you can see, if you do that and there's absolutely no motion, you are quite far away.
Indeed. Yes, that was absolutely the last active frame that it could have hit. For the heavy one. I wonder what the light one does?
Right when it's closer.
Oops. I might have been doing the medium. Which, the medium one also hits far away, but the light one does hit close. Okay. So that is effectively safe then, too. And if it's
More than
non-active...
safe, it's plus. It's always
it's
safe.
plus. Yes. Okay. See, little things I didn't know. I didn't ever really focus on Razor Edge Slicer in terms of how plus or minus is this specifically.
Unfortunately, I'm fairly sure that the EX version... Actually, I've never tested whether or not her EX versions differ the way Buki's Kunai do, so you probably should test that yourself. They used to be homing, but they might not be.
Homing in which sense?
In that she'll never try to go over.
This might take a while to build meter. But no, she will never go over with an EX hooligan. It's not possible in any way.
Okay.
Oops. Oh, well, I guess that works too. But yeah. No, EX hooligan can't go over.
Okay.
All your options are forward from there, which I suppose is the balancer. She can't cross you up with it because but alternately it's really fast, so...
On the other hand, the move is +3 as is, so who cares?
Oh right, but I will go through you like that, what I just demonstrated.
But it's not relevant to what we're discussing overall. Plus, you do have the option of doing hooligan and doing nothing. So your opponent must deal with that.
Oops. So... Damn it. Wait, why am I using a kick button? No wonder it's not working. Actually, good question. What does this do in the corner? Damn it. So I'm not going to go over your... Well, I might do it if I have a no input ending there. Because I don't think I really have any other options, so... Okay. But only the no input can go over your head there. Which is a thing. Alright. I'm not sure if it's a useful thing, but it is a thing. It's also easy to hit that really...
And then because you have other dive kick versions of it, you can get more stuff.
Then of course now I'm not sure how I want to use... how I would go about actually using this.
Well, I wasn't actually suggesting anything in terms of uses.
Sure,
because, as noted before, there's stuff that you're missing in your game that you don't know you're missing because you never tried to apply your current tools to the situation.
Indeed. So that's a little bit interesting. Anyway. I suppose it's something to keep in mind, and then possibly look for, well, other options as well.
Because one person against whom you definitely need that is Colleen, because you can't get advantage on Colleen with the grounded one that you normally do. If she reads it, you're just going to get EX countered and be very sad.
Which grounded one? The
combo you do normally.
Oh, yeah, this. Yeah, because it's going to be blatantly obvious which counter to pick. Instead of...
Actually, you really shouldn't survive this against Amara either, it's just that she's still getting used to parrying single parry buttons after blocking the first hit of a string.
Sure. And she doesn't even have to worry about the height of it.
But it's similar things to yesterday's stream where if you think about Urian's armor game differently in the Ken matchup. The matchup changes. Ryu is not a character that causes a lot of people to change their matchup, which is also partly possibly why the general feeling is like that. The popularity of characters that require specific knowledge is also a function of how complicated someone thinks a game is. Lara doesn't require a lot of specific knowledge. Bava does, but people are too busy losing to realize that. And the rest is Ryu, Ken, and Fuma. While those characters can be interesting in and of themselves, most people don't need specific tech to fight them. It's only when you fight a Fang that you think to yourself, oh, I really don't know how to play my own character. Or you assume that Fang is broken and that the matchup is terrible and that everything about the game is terrible too.
And we've all met those people as well, yes. Is back medium punch cancelable?
Cammy's back medium punch is cancelable.
Interesting. Special cancelable or just V?
Special cancelable. That's the whole K-Brad hit confirm incredibleness.
I see. I think I don't necessarily have registered that particular detail. Okay.
They make a huge deal about the fact that he can hit confirm the back medium punch, which they should because it is a 4-frame move.
Yeah.
And not only is he hit confirming the back medium punch, he's hit confirming that he counter hit it. Now granted he's setting up a situation in which he's likely to counter hit it, but...
Let's see. Joker points out if you control the distance, you can cross them up with it and do a damage combo. Is she done? Yes, the target combo back medium punch heavy kick is a thing. And the heavy kick actually, well I presume it's cancelable.
I believe they changed it so that now that hits on people who were initially crouching. So it's not as if K-Brad actually needs to do that confirm anymore. The reason he needed it before was because even if you hit with the back medium, the heavy kick could still whiff on crouchers. So he had to be able to confirm to hit with cannon spike, which he learned relatively quickly.
Yeah. But yes, I believe the back medium punch does force stand now, so you don't whiff. So it's not necessarily a problem anymore. Although it's still entirely badass that he can pull it off at all.
Well, there are other times when it might be necessary.
Certainly with a light spike in certain anti-air situations where you're not going to land the heavy kick. Oops, that was silly. But, alright, well, the next question becomes what to try to experiment with next.
Well, one thing I'll note to you is that you don't actually play footsies with this character, even though she totally can.
Yes, and I'm somewhat aware of that, and I was sort of getting at that at the beginning. With how my style ends up much more get-in or closing style than footsie style, even though it, given my nature and tendencies, probably should not.
Which brings me back to the question of why exactly it is that you don't play Kareen and Cammy exactly the same.
And honestly, if I had an answer to that, I would probably be in better shape.
They both have approximately the same range on their stand medium kick. They now have the same frames on their stand and medium kick. And neither of them is cancelable anyway, so there's no specific reason why...
I suppose. The fact that I don't use her
one person and not the other.
The fact that I don't use her stand medium kick is a little odd.
I would argue that, oh, well, maybe it's because you're getting ready to do more moves, or you can't cancel from it, but you can't do that on Kareen either.
True. But if you watch McCreen play, I actually don't use that button a great deal, of late anyway, that I've noticed. which is itself a little bit odd. I wonder if I can... Oh, well, I would need to wait in the round for her to get in their V. Supposed to finish that with a cannon spike.
Actually, that's a good question. I will double check that.
Which thing?
Mr. Joker notes that obviously forward heavy kick is not cancelable from back heavy punch. From back medium punch, sorry. Back medium punch, however, is... Yeah, it's 6 frames on counter hit.
I see.
Not enough to get too much. But definitely enough to get cannon spikes.
Right. Or, like a crouch medium punch, or a stand heavy punch. Like, most buttons which you then can cancel into into cannon spikes or other things.
The question is, again, is it really useful now that the back medium punch forces stand? Maybe not, but you asked if it was cancelable. And I figured the reason you're asking is whether or not it's cancelable on block, which you could just quickly test now. I would presume that you'd want to cancel it to Hooligan though. And the answer is yes. So, there you go.
Are you sure?
No, not completely, but you're doing... While that move does recover really fast, it could matter one way or the other. It looks to me as if you cancel it, but it could also be that it does not functionally matter.
Okay, yeah, no, it's
recovery is
definitely
so
a
fast.
cancel, because I tried doing it the slow way, and the result of this was a lot more delay. So yes, it seems to cancel.
Right, so maybe that's what you will need to do some match where that's the thing.
Perhaps. Yeah, I would not have expected forward heavy kick to be a cancelable.
On the other hand, there's never any reason you need to do that.
Pretty much. And it combos into crouch medium punch and moves you forward so you can do it, so you can basically do whatever you want. Done.
Final round. Fight.
It's really hard for me to input the just stand medium punch. It's not a problem I have on Kareen, although I definitely don't use that button as much as I should. Just because whenever I'm hitting a button in, even a standing button, I have my block held, generally.
Well, that's another thing to consider. if you happen to hit back medium punch in the same situations that you would rather hit forward, what happens?
Depending where I am, I could possibly get whiff punished, but
I don't see how.
well, what's the recovery on it? Because
The
usually
recovery on back medium punch is 14 frames.
sure.
Active for 4. It's relatively hard to lose out.
Alright.
Not like super hard because standing medium punch is obviously faster. But since your hurt box is not as extended in the first place, again, little things to think about.
Yeah,
Especially since your opponent can't whiff punish a move that they weren't expecting.
this is true. Oh, hey! We have Mr. Deathstroker himself right here. Well, welcome to our battle lounge. Also a Cammy, unsurprisingly.
Well, presumably has come to give you some lessons and stuff.
I hope so. That's a very nice
please,
color for that costume.
We very seriously appreciate that.
Indeed. It's actually a very nice color for that costume. I have that costume, but I generally play it with the color 2 blue. Aha. We have from Mr. Joker that he mains Akuma and
Even
Ryu,
more
although
useful.
he practices.
That is even better.
So he will definitely know the ins and outs of Ryu as well.
But you see, right there is one very strong argument for the stand medium punch, and it's not really the one that you'd mix up with other situations either.
Well, what specifically? I'm tracking it, but I'm also sort of not tracking it just because my mind, like half of my mind is keeping up. And half
Like
isn't.
Koreans, it is much longer in footsies than would be expected,
Yes.
and therefore helps you much more.
Yeah, I also really do not use her light buttons, like, at all, beyond the one that transferred over from forcing it into my Kareen in certain situations that I then still need to clean up. That hurt. Okay, I think I suspected that combo, but did not know for sure. The stand medium punch into crouch medium kick. I knew stand medium punch into crouch medium punch. That's more range limited, obviously. Didn't have the EX there.
Of course, the difficulty in dealing with Amara as a general thing, which again is a perception thing. There are a lot of perception-related things like this in the game. You are used to Amara, you're used to her level of defensive play and similar things.
Yes.
And she in turn is used to you adapting around her defensive play rather quickly.
This is
So
true.
on.
Stand medium punch and a stand heavy punch is better, but distance. Indeed. Yeah. Distance really makes or breaks most combos at the end of the day.
And things like pushback in the corner matter as well, for example.
Uh-huh. Well, okay, I had a question about that for you, actually, because we were talking earlier in the day with Vine, and I noted her mentioning that, or the consideration of pushback in the corner versus not. My impression was that pushback on a move is always the same, and if it can push your opponent out, it will. Otherwise, it will push you out. In the corner, for instance. But are the distances actually
Relatively
different in the
true.
corner?
But that's not really the reason one looks at things like quote-unquote pushback in the corner. The reason pushback in the corner is different is because, one, it is true that your opponent cannot go back. It is also true that your opponent is extremely unlikely to move, or even be able to move, obviously since they can't walk backward, in the amount of time it takes for the move to come out.
Okay.
So whereas if you know the pushback of your move, you know the distance you will end up at if your opponent simply blocks a neutral without moving whatsoever.
This is a fair point, but not everyone else does that.
But a slow move, your opponent might move out of the way a bit
Okay.
and change the spacing you end up at, whereas in the corner they don't have this
But not in
option.
the corner.
So you
Okay.
can be relatively sure where you will end up after each hit.
Alright then. That makes sense. Thank you. That is the sort of logical structure trap my mind will never get itself out of.
There are also other moves that do have specific pushback that changes in the corner, but it's not something you can easily calculate in that way.
Alright then.
This is heavily related to EX specials, more so than anything else, birdies especially.
Joker lets us
Because the
know
game-
that each punch, kick, etc. pushback changes in the corner a little bit. Wow.
Also note that this is slightly affected by active frames as well, which I think they only added in this version, but I
see.
actually never tested this in 4.
Sure, I was wondering
didn't care enough.
as much in terms of assuming somewhat that active frames would do that. I think I did just
It also
see
has
a...
to do with the cancelability of the recovery of a move, which is a whole other topic to learn. Chun-Li, for example, if you keep hitting standing heavy punch as fast as you can, you will go from not being able to hit your opponent to being able to hit your opponent slowly, because she doesn't move as far back when she recovers if you hit the button as soon as you can afterward. This is also true for stand heavy kick,
I see.
somewhat, and definitely stand medium kick.
I
So
see.
you have to know whether or not hitting the same button over and over with your character brings you closer to your opponent or not.
I think I have encountered this in certain trials and combos with both Ryu and Karin. Obviously, more so Karin. But that if my timing is slightly off, the recovery of my stand heavy punch brings me back a little too far, and I whiff my combo. Or maybe the reel goes weird, or things like that.
Final round. Fight.
Alright then.
So in the end, it's a matter more so of how far you're willing to take your character. And we've been through this particular reaction to Street Fighter games. It literally happens every single time.
Just in terms of whenever they release a game, it takes a while for people to get used to the idea that there's a lot more there than necessarily is obvious.
Yes, always. Usually because, well, no, in Street Fighter 4 is because there wasn't anything else. But as Mr. Joker is about to show you, Cammy's offense was more linear before than it is now. Now it's really good, whereas before it was more so set play. It was predictable, but it had the potential to be a guessing game, whereas in this it's not as much of a guessing game, but more of a straight up, you can't do anything about this unless you're willing to take a risk, which means that she is a true rushdown character.
I see.
But the way that it works in terms of footsies,
This lag is apparently bad for me here.
well, double check because it's not bad for us, so there's probably a slight chance of something on your side.
Well, I'll have a look at this. It shouldn't be doing anything. I'm pretty sure I've finally successfully taught my system to never interrupt me. But, who
Never
knows,
know.
really. I don't see anything going on, so, alright.
Well, it'll most likely clear itself up then.
I hope so.
Cammy's ability to vary her block strings is probably the strongest thing she can do.
How so?
I'm pretty sure Mr. Joker will show you why that is.
Alright.
But much like Akuma and what Fido was doing, it's easy to prime yourself to look for a specific string and respond to it, but because Cammy doesn't have to do a specific string,
I see.
you end up having to learn more of them, not being able to respond, feeling like you're in a scramble,
And
and
certainly-
then she'll completely throw you off and do something like hooligan instead of bothering to continue the string, and then you have even more to mentally deal with.
Sure.
Stuff like that.
Indeed.
And once a Cammy player basically quote-unquote smells blood and realizes that you are determined to get out of their block strings somehow, they'll just, like, vary them until you die because you keep on hitting buttons.
Indeed. Because you gotta do something at some points. Although view reversal should be on my plate, and it isn't.
No, it doesn't really help because
No?
most of her buttons aren't like that.
I see. Alright then.
You must have a very fast view reversal or a very specific way of looking at the strings themselves, which puts you back to where you started, where you have to learn all of Cammy's strings so that you can learn even which ones you can use view reversal on. It's kind of a tall order for some people.
I see. Yes. That, pressure certainly is potent. And I obviously am not taking any advantage of it at all with my very predictable 1 or 2 block strings.
Well, it looks like the lag didn't work out as we intended, so... Karine also has similar sorts of block strings, but hers do have more limitations by far. And
For those who I wish to protect, I will fight you.
you definitely don't play her with them either, so you have to decide whether or not you want to learn them or if you're going to go full footsies, or at least mostly footsies.
Right, and my immediate inclination is not specifically to try and learn them. So... Why do I think that reaches farther than it does? I don't have any reason to.
Well, since you're playing, I will relay what Mr. Joker has pointed out, which I think I've never actually taught you. Mobility tool moves that are effectively unreactables, such as basically doing heavy cannon drill, spiral arrow, and then just dash up. You have a lot of situations where your opponent just doesn't know what to do.
In what
Because
situation?
they're like, you just used spiral arrow in neutral, or after a knockdown that I should be able to get away from. Why would you do that? And then they'd hit buttons, and then they get crush countered by standing heavy kick.
I see. That was a total waste. Okay.
Final round. Fight.
Alright, anyway.
This is why I was attempting to work more block strings into the Kami bot, but I recognize that there is no sensible way to make the Kami bot able to do them regularly to a level where most people that actually have to deal with higher level Kami will need or be able to input.
Sure, it seems like something you would have to do with a lot of weird edge shifting, but then you would end up making the bot almost exclusively about that.
So there are probably some uses you can use for it, but at the moment I don't have any plans to change CamiBot. I will probably make CamiBot 2.0 with them. I'm still thinking that basically our 2.0 bots are probably for people who are in silver going toward gold rather than the bots that we currently have, which are bronze going to silver mostly. Also, I figured that the current CamiBot does have decent pressure, but she also has the parts of Cami that are the hardest for most people to visualize in terms of how to deal with them. You can probably get most beginner players to accept just blocking when Cami is in your face.
Sure.
Just get them to understand you don't understand this character well enough yet to go doing punishes, and then you might guess and die because your opponent is better than you. Or maybe they're not better than you and they just managed to beat you anyway.
What a
So I didn't
scam.
want the bot to have that as its focus because it's more so something that you deal with in real time against a strong cat.
Huh. I didn't realize that was a meaningful anti-air button, but I suppose it's at least as good as a light kick. Light punch.
However, if we get a character that is easily able to replace CamiBot as our throw tech bot, I will probably consider it. It's going to depend a lot on what Minat's playstyle is like when she comes out. If Minot is anything like Rose, she's almost certainly going to take that spot because she won't have pressure strings. But she will have good throw spacing and probably good enough walk speed that I end up doing it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, from our side, we'll be closing up soon in terms of stream audio, at least.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does seem to be getting to be about that time. And we need dinner on my side as well. So definitely thank you for stopping by and helping us out a bit, Mr. Joker. Although it looks like he might have got disconnected from the actual stream video.
Well, I think that the experience is going to be very hands-on and probably not going to require it.
Indeed. Ah. Oh, okay, he's got to leave after this one. Got to work early in the morning.
Ah, I see.
Alright.
For those who I wish to protect, I will fight you.
Well, that's good timing given that we will actually be closing up the stream around that time. So, yeah, let's make this the last set of the night.
Alright then.
The main thing to note here is that the variability of Cammy's jabs makes it difficult to tell whether or not to parry her.
I see.
But because the jab counter hit doesn't specifically lead to a lot, on the second jab, you can afford to risk it a couple of times, at least enough to make your opponent consider whether or not you want to. And that was one weird net hiccup, but seems to almost be over.
Yes. I ended up seeing it on my side as well.
Yeah, it looks like it's over. But after the jab, you can be pretty much assured that you can just hit. Because her stand heavy punch is still 6 frames, so even the large advantage from stand light punch will definitely still get caught in parries, even without the parry being perfect. Your main concern is whether or not she does stand light punch twice, in which case no, your counters will not help you. But if she does it twice, it's technically chainable and therefore a block string, and you can't parry it anyway, so it never comes up. So Amara will probably continue to mash out her ability to parry just once and then get something off that. And everyone who goes up against her will probably have to do their work in terms of making sure that they vary up their strings occasionally so that they can get the counter hit rather than getting parried.
Yes, and that will be something I will appreciate. I obviously don't see it a whole lot against online Ryu, but it does seem like something that I would like to train against. Yes, she will end up parrying a lot, if only because she's still trying to learn it. So, I mean, do it when you're going to screw up too, or you'll never learn when you can.
Round 1. Fight.
Aha.
Of course, there's always the multi-focus issue where the person who has the higher focus overall will be able to get the most out of their match. in the sense that the more tricks you know, the more levels you have in various things, and the more things you're comfortable with, the more you can chain one thing into another. And that's extremely important in terms of learning processes. And this is why the ones that apply to matchups are so important to themselves. Relative to the others.
Looks like Miss Fine here is distracting our Joker.
Well, it's unlikely that there'll be too much trouble parrying those because, again, Camibot has heavily trained her for this. The question is whether or not she can get the direct timing after it, usually.
Sure.
For any viewers that are not familiar with what I'm talking about and have not come to the stream through the website, Camibot is available at 2-mk.org.
Indeed.
She's primarily about throw teching, and therefore you can use her for that. But she does use the V skill, so if you're a Ryu player trying to learn how to get it done, you can at least load her up. Or at least a portion of what she does. Because doing it under pressure when you're worried about all the other things Camibot can do, it's probably a little bit better than just straight parrying it. As you will note there, for example, Amara can totally parry V skill if she sees it happening over and over, but when you actually throw it into Camibot, there may be a little bit more complications there.
And anyway, in addition to Camibot, we have training mode bots, which are effectively custom AIs built out of the playback recording feature in Street Fighter V's training mode. For most characters now, and every week another one, at our website 2-mk.org/bots, if you are interested in more characters than just Cammy as well.
Well, it looks like the lag has robbed us of a climactic finish, so
Well,
we're
that's
going to hope that Mr. Joker just finishes this off and we'll head out for the night.
Indeed.
Actually, in that regard, therefore, this is really an Amara signing off stream audio for the night.
Alright. Good evening, you two.
Round one. Fight.
That jab shimmied. Dang. Alright, I believe that's Mr. Death Joker's second win in this first two set. And he is off to his, well, to sleep before his work at SeaWorld in the morning. So, this is Kanzuki Dynasty signing off as well. We will be stopping our stream now. Please visit us again at our Twitch channel 2_MK or at 2-mk.org, where you can find our bots, our YouTube channel, and other such things. Have a good evening, everyone, and thank you for watching. And thank you especially, Mr. Joker, for stopping by and helping us out. We'd be very glad to see you again in the future.